Hey everybody, it's Robert. As you can see, today I'll be talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But before we get to that, I have to say that I just got back from Chicago, where I spent 7 days for my cousin's wedding, and I have a lot of insights to share about it that I am going to then relate to Maslow's hierarchy. Alright, so let's start with this. I spent 7 days in Chicago. Let's say that this is the beginning of the 7 days and this is the end. On the last day of my trip, I was going to hang out with my friend Dan, and on the way to go meet with him, a really interesting sense of calmness came over me, or calmness, and I think that the reason for this has to do with the fact that I was at the end of my trip and I was looking backwards. Contrast that with at the beginning of the trip, there was so much uncertainty. I didn't know how the wedding was going to go. I didn't know which friends I would see. I didn't know where I would be working out. All these things that were uncertain at the beginning. What if this happens? What if that happens? And it was not until the end, until I got this sort of sense of what you might call safety. And I was looking backwards, right? At the beginning, I'm looking forwards with uncertainty. At the end, I'm looking backward from a position of safety. And I think you experience a different set of emotions. It's kind of like if you're swimming from shore to from across a lake from one shore to the other shore, and you're like halfway there, and you're like, well, I could try this new swim move, but what if it fatigues me and I don't make it to the other side? There's that uncertainty, right? But once you get to the other side, you've made it, and you look back and you're like, oh yeah, I could have done this, could have done that, right? But in the moment, during the journey, there's that sense of how is this going to unfold? So let's put that on the back burner. Let me go over Maslow's hierarchy, and then we're going to tie the two together. So if you are familiar with the hierarchy, this is going to trip you out. If you're not, let's go over it briefly. Maslow was a famous psychologist who talked about 5 human needs, and he put them in order of what needs to be met first in general before the other ones. So first, we need physiology needs. Well, we need to meet those needs with food, water, air, etc. Basic bodily needs. Second, we need a sense of safety. We need to know that we're not under threat by predators and things like that. Once this is established, then there's a need for belongingness, or being part of a group. Then there is a need for self-esteem and a feeling that you are worthwhile as an individual. And finally, at the top, the Holy Grail, self-actualization, which means fulfilling your potential completely. All right. Now, the interesting thing is that from this trip, I did a lot of observations, and I watched socializing at a very detailed level, and it occurred to me that there's a pattern that people bond over different types of content in their conversation. So people might bond over something physiological. Have you ever heard somebody say to you, oh, I'm so tired today, right? Well, right here, that's physiology. Another thing that came up this trip was I was watching the news. Well, some of my family members were. So since I don't really watch the news myself, I was kind of struck by just how saturated it is with threats. And hurricane this, and shootings over here, and watch out for identity theft over here, and just everything. Threats to safety, right? So the news, people bond over that. Although it's not really a safety threat. I heard a lot of people bonding over traffic. Oh, traffic is so bad going there. Oh yeah, I know it's really bad going here too. And it was interesting to see people. This is how the small talk that took place. Uh, Number 3, belongingness, being part of a group. So what would that be? That would be like any in-group psychology, in-group thinking. So teams, like sports teams. I went to a Chicago Cubs game. So at the end, everybody goes, "Go Cubs, go!" All right, that's right there. So sports. My team versus your team, right? Self-esteem. Now, what would be an example of that? People talk about, oh, I accomplished this or that. How's work going? Oh, you did this, or I went to a trip here. And so, kind of like accomplishments. That can be a theme of conversation too. But then there's this highest level. So what does this look like? Because this is at the top, so it deserves some attention. Throughout my life, I've noticed when people strike me as very authentic, and there are 2 people that come to mind when I think of expressing, conversation in as an example of self-actualization. One example is in high school. My friend Mohammed, he was always in his experience and his thoughts. So one day he had this painting that he pulled up on the computer or something, and it had a bridge over water, and he said, what do you think about this painting? And I said, what is this, a school assignment or something? And he said, no, I feel this way about it. What do you feel about it? I'm like, well, why are you doing this if you're not getting a grade for it, right? It's like backwards thinking. But he wanted to. He was expressing himself purely. Another example, in Costa Rica, I was at an internet cafe, and this one student came up to me. He got introduced through a mutual friend, and the student just out of the blue, he said, "Oh, this is my poetry notebook," and he showed it to me. He started reading poetry from it, and I just thought this was the coolest thing, because he was so into it, he said, and he was just reading this. Like, we were complete strangers, but here we are, we're bonding over something that's occurring inside of him, pure self-expression in an art form. That's self-actualization. So let's go with, we'll call it self-expression. All right. Now let me make a distinction, because Maslow also did. And that distinction is that the needs below this line are all called deficiency needs. They're kind of motivated out of like a lack, like, oh, I'm lacking food, I'm lacking safety, I need to get this really quick. Whereas self-actualization is considered a being need. All right, I'm not going to say much more about that, but let's leave it at that. If you're with me so far, let's come back to this pattern. Swimming from shore to shore, beginning to end, and dealing with uncertainty at the beginning until you get to a conclusion. What does this pattern remind you of? It reminds me of the common structure of a movie, just a regular drama, a feature film. And there's a lot of examples you can think of where there's uncertainty at the beginning and then there's a resolution at the end. So, it could be, well, let's apply it to the hierarchy of needs and to the different themes of conversation that you can have with other people, the themes of our lives, right? So you could have a movie that has a theme around physiology, right? The country is starving. Are we going to find food? Are we going to survive? Like that movie Castaway. Are we going to get off the island? Right? We could have a movie based around safety. Right? Are we going to defeat the evil witch, or are we going to escape the forest, or right? Beat up the bad guys. Belongingness, sports. I mean, sports is our team going to win? The good team over the bad team, right? Self-esteem and accomplishments. Rocky Balboa, who's going to win the championship match, right? And so with all of these, you have to ask what emotion is driving them. There's an emotion to it. And a large part of this is anxiety. Anxiety and unpleasant feelings, right? If you are hungry, that's unpleasant. If you are unsafe, that's unpleasant. If you are outcast from a group, that is unpleasant. If you think you're a piece of crap, that is unpleasant. So there's this anxiety. Now, how does this connect? Okay, anxiety and uncertainty. All right, so in both of these examples, you see this progression from here to here and from here to here. So all of these needs are fueled by anxiety, but what fuels self-expression? You could argue that once you have a sense of safety, belongingness, and you feel good about yourself, then you're just going to express, right? If you don't feel good about yourself, then you are caught here, you can't go any higher, and you're caught here. And what does that look like? It looks like being overly concerned about what other people think and not sharing your own ideas out of fear that it might show that you are not a valuable person. People might judge you for it, right? And that's going to keep you from reaching the top self-expression. What's the safest thing to do? Complain that you're tired. Why? Because nobody's gonna judge you for that, right? So here we have this sort of range or progression, right? From anxiety-based needs to being-based needs. And so here we have up here the progression from at the beginning, uncertainty, to at the end, safety. And when you look back, you're going to have a different perspective than when you look forward. Now this got me thinking about the end of life, right? Because if after my 7 days of vacation, I was feeling a certain way about the last 7 days, could the same thing happen with life? At the end of your life, are you going to look back and experience a different set of emotions and values than you did throughout life as you were 20 years old, trying to figure out your career, 30 years old, trying to build a family, 40 years old, wondering what's going to happen with your kids, right? You're dealing with uncertainty the whole time, and you are experiencing the drama and the storyline of your own life. So this whole thing, the reason I'm putting this up here, is to gain some perspective, right, and some clarity, because we need to chill out. Anytime that there is a strong emotion like anxiety, which is fueled often by uncertainty, we fall into a role. Human life is about relationships, and we relate not only with other people, but with objects and with our emotions. So the question is, what is your relationship to uncertainty? Is uncertainty your master and you're the slave? Or is it the other way around? In college, we were playing in a championship hockey game. And I remember we were in overtime. It was tied. And this guy on our team, Joe, awesome athlete, he was on the football team too. He was on the rink, and he had this total calm. In a time of extreme pressure and uncertainty, he had so much calm. And of course, this is for various reasons, but the point is, In the face of uncertainty, he was calm. He visualized what he wanted to do, which was score the goal, and he was focused on that. He was not a slave to uncertainty and anxiety. He was moving forward with equanimity. And what happened? He scored the game-winning goal in overtime, and we won the championship. So, in your own life, what are you going through right now that, because you're not at the end of it, you're experiencing some uncertainty, and that's destabilizing you, and it's causing you to hold back, right? That's the question that I'll leave you with for today.